Welcome along. We've gathered quite a stack of sources for you today, really diving deep into the latest news coming out of East and Southeast Asia.
Yeah, and our job, as always, is to try and help you cut through all that noise, pull out the key insights, and, make sense of what's actually going on.
Exactly. And looking through all this material, there's one theme that really, really stands out, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's this huge demographic challenge facing quite a few East Asian economies. We're talking falling birth rates, rapidly aging populations. It's a massive shift.
It really is. So for this deep dive, we're going to focus mainly on the scale of this situation in places like, say, Japan, South Korea, China, Taiwan.
Right, and look at some of the, well, pretty unique ways they're trying to deal with it. Some quite surprising strategies popping up.
Definitely. And then, yeah, we'll quickly scan some other big headlines from across the wider region, too. Sound good?
Let's do it. Okay, Japan first. The government data from 2024, it's incredibly stark.
Stark is the word. Annual births fell to a record low. What was the number?
Just 686,061 babies born. That's a drop of 5.7% from the year before.
Wow. And the sources point out that's the first time it's ever dipped below 700,000 since they started keeping records.
Yeah, and that was way back in 1899, so a very long time.
Give you some perspective.
It does, and it's the 16th year in a row that the number has fallen. If you compare it to, like, the peak after the war, 1949, they had 2.7 million births.
2.7 million.
Yeah, so now it's roughly a quarter of that. It's a dramatic fall off.
You can see why Prime Minister Ishiba called it a silent emergency. It really feels like that.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the experts in these sources saying? What's driving this decline?
Well, a few things come up repeatedly. Tough job prospects, the high cost of living, those are big ones, especially for young people thinking about families.
That makes sense.
There's also a lot of talk about the corporate culture, still quite gender biased, apparently, putting extra burdens on women, especially working mothers. And maybe a bit surprising for some, this issue around couples having to choose a single surname when they marry. That's also mentioned as something putting some women off marriage itself.
Huh. Interesting. And the consequences for Japan's future, they look pretty serious.
Yeah, they really do. The population's currently about 124 million. Projections show it falling to maybe 87 million by 2070.
87 million.
And by then, something like 40% of the people could be over 65.
40%. That's huge.
It is, and it's not just abstract numbers. The articles had this striking image of an abandoned school, closed down simply because there weren't enough kids being born anymore.
Right. So it's happening now, impacting communities.
Exactly. It really brings it home.
Okay, so Japan's situation is clear. But they're not alone in this, are they? South Korea is also mentioned as really grappling with this.
Absolutely. South Korea has been trying for years, with national policies to encourage more births. But what caught my eye in these sources were some of the really specific local government ideas lately.
Local ideas, like what? I think I saw something about cash incentives.
Yeah, exactly. Cash for getting married, basically. Like in Busan, the Saha district,
Oh, yeah.
they're offering couples who get married after going to one of their matchmaking events up to 20 million won. That's, around US $14,700?
$14,000. Wow.
Yeah.
How does that work? Is it just a lump sum?
No, it's quite specific. They'll give you like 500,000 won for dating costs,
Okay.
1 million won for engagement stuff, and then a big chunk, 10 million won just for travel, basically paying for the honeymoon.
They're subsidizing honeymoons. That's
Yeah.
something else. Are other places doing similar things?
Yeah, there was another example, Jiuchang County. They're offering 600,000 won a year for 3 years.
Right.
Just for newlyweds, aged 19 to 45, who lived there for more than 3 months. It shows how creative, maybe even a bit desperate, some local areas are getting.
Yeah, you really feel the urgency. But I did see some pushback in the sources, some criticism of these cash schemes.
That's right. The critics argue, and it's noted in the articles, that these sort of one-off financial incentives probably won't fix the deeper structural problems.
What, cost of living, housing?
Exactly. The huge cost of raising kids, housing being unaffordable, job insecurity, those are seen as the much bigger hurdles that cash alone doesn't really address.
Okay, makes sense. Let's shift over to China now, also facing what the reports call a demographic crisis.
Yes, very much so. China's dealing with this triple whammy: aging population, shrinking workforce, and a social welfare system under real strain.
Right, and there's that phrase often used.
You need old before getting rich. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a key point highlighted. They're facing these aging challenges before reaching the kind of high income status that, say, Japan or South Korea had when their aging accelerated. It's a different economic context.
And their fertility rate is also incredibly low.
It is estimated around 1.1 children per woman, miles below the 2.1 replacement level needed just to keep the population stable long term.
So what are they looking at? Any interesting research mentioned on potential solutions?
Well, there was this interesting study from Fudan University and the University of Hong Kong. They suggested something a bit different. Subsidies aimed at getting fathers more involved in childcare and housework.
Subsidies for dads.
Yeah.
How would that boost fertility? Seems a bit indirect.
Well, the thinking, or what the research found, was that supporting dad's involvement at home actually led to significantly higher long-term fertility gains compared to just subsidizing mothers.
Really? Why?
It ties back to those traditional expectations we mentioned earlier, the burden falling heavily on women.
Right?
These old norms are clashing with modern economic life, with more women working. So the idea is, if you can ease that domestic burden on women by incentivizing dads to do more, it might make having kids seem more feasible for couples.
That's a fascinating angle. Okay, let's turn to Taiwan. Reports say they're aging super fast, too.
Incredibly fast. They're set to become a super-aged society by 2025. That means over 20% of the population will be 65 or older.
20% by next year.
Wow. And it gets steeper. Projections are for over 30% by 2039.
And their birth rate, also among the world's lowest.
Right near the bottom, yeah. The TFR, total fertility rate, dropped to just 0.89 in 2024.
0.89.
Yeah. The sources mention Singapore for comparison, which was at 0.97 in 2024, also extremely low, but Taiwan's even lower.
And how's that affecting households?
Well, fewer kids, more people living alone or just as couples. The average household size has shrunk. It hit a record low of 2.52 people in 2024.
Okay.
Again, compared to Singapore's 3.09, you see that trend quite clearly in Taiwan.
And that same theme we saw in China about women's roles in caregiving that comes up for Taiwan, too.
It does. You have more women in the workforce, which is great economically, up from 44% in '94 to over 51% in 2022.
Right.
But if those traditional gender norms persist, where women are still expected to be the primary caregivers for children and aging parents, well, it creates this big caregiving gap at home.
Which leads us nicely into how Taiwan is actually managing this growing elderly population, especially since most seniors want to stay at home.
Exactly. And this is where Taiwan's heavy reliance on foreign caregivers comes into sharp focus in the sources. The context is really important here.
Okay.
Almost everyone, like 98% of seniors 65 plus, lives at home in Taiwan. Very few, just over 2%, are in care facilities. And crucially, over 90% want to live at home.
So huge preference for home care and this caregiving gap you mentioned. How many foreign caregivers are we talking about?
The numbers are huge. It went from just over 300 back in 1992 to more than 214,000 by 2024.
200,000. Wow. Where do they mainly come from?
Mostly Indonesia, they make up about 80%. Then the Philippines at nearly 11%, and Vietnam around 9%.
And the sources connect this reliance strongly to cultural factors.
Yeah, definitely. Those Confucian values about filial piety, caring for parents at home being a family duty, that's deeply ingrained.
Right.
Sending parents to an institution can be seen as, well, unfilial. So hiring a foreign live-in caregiver has become this kind of solid compromise, as the sources put it. It keeps care in the home, but provides the needed help.
And I imagine the cost difference is a major factor, too.
Oh, absolutely. Economics is a huge driver. The minimum monthly salary for a foreign caregiver is NT $20,000. Local Taiwanese caregivers cost way more, upwards of NT $50,000, maybe even higher, so it's significantly cheaper.
Okay. What about the government policies around this? How does Taiwan regulate it?
Well, initially it was set up to fill labor shortages, not just in care, but other sectors too. But Taiwan's system, unlike, say, Hong Kong or Singapore, has generally required stricter medical checks to prove someone actually needs a caregiver.
Right, so you have to demonstrate need.
Yeah. And the job scope is meant to be quite clearly defined, primarily elder care or disability care, with rules about doing other household stuff.
Have the rules changed much over the years?
Oh, yes. Quite a bit. At first, caregivers could only stay for 2 years, max. That's gradually been relaxed. Now it's up to 12 years, sometimes longer.
12 years.
And then in 2022, they brought in this intermediate skilled status. If a caregiver has worked for 6+ years and meets certain skill and salary levels, they can switch to this status.
And what does that status mean?
It means they can stay in Taiwan without a time limit, And after 5 years in that category, they can even apply for permanent residency.
Ah, so potential pathway to staying long-term.
Exactly. By early 2024, over 15,000 caregivers had reached that status, so it's significant.
And there was a more recent change, too, wasn't there? Making it easier for some seniors to hire help.
That's right. An amendment passed Jan 2025, effective this July. It basically lets seniors over 80 and those 70-79 with stage 2 plus cancer hire foreign help without needing those strict medical assessments anymore.
Okay, so that removes a barrier for quite a few older people.
It could make a big difference. Estimates suggest maybe over 500,000 more Taiwanese could become eligible because of this change.
But does that create other problems, like, is there enough supply?
That's the worry. The Ministry of Labor actually warned that this could push demand way beyond the current supply of caregivers. They might need, like, an extra 160,000 caregivers to meet the potential need.
So, easier access for families, but a potential bottleneck in finding caregivers. It sounds like a really complex system, and the sources definitely highlighted challenges too, right?
Oh, for sure. It's not all smooth sailing. Language barriers are a big one. Many caregivers arrive with little or no Mandarin.
I can imagine that's tough.
Yeah. And cultural barriers, sometimes discrimination too. The articles shared stories like employers asking caregivers to remove headscarves or not respecting dietary needs like avoiding pork. I'm sorry story touched on this. The sources kind of contrast Taiwan's relative cultural homogeneity with places like Singapore or Malaysia, suggesting maybe integration can sometimes be harder.
And what about sticking to the job description? Are caregivers always just doing care work?
Apparently not always. There are reports of rules being bent, caregivers treated more like general household servants, asked to clean the whole house, cook for everyone, even when the rules say their job is focused on the person needing care.
Okay. And potential for exploitation within the system itself
Yeah.
through agencies.
Yes, that was mentioned too, particularly the broker system. Agencies sometimes allegedly withhold passports, charge really high fees, or don't help workers if there's a dispute with the employer.
Right.
There was the story of Maizero, who was hired for elder care, but said she was forced into farm work, and her agency supposedly wouldn't help her switch jobs like the contract said they should.
So definitely some serious issues there. But were there other perspectives, maybe more positive takes or nuances?
Yes, it wasn't all negative. Sociologist Liang Lifeng pointed out that families often stay very involved. The caregiver is there to supplement the family's role, not completely replace it.
Okay, so it's more of a partnership.
Kind of. And Dr. Lin Yu Lingning noted that in Taiwan, because of the filial piety ideas in the hiring process, the employers themselves often have to be quite involved learning care skills, too. They're like personal carers being assisted.
Ah, that's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah, she also said many older Taiwanese still feel it's their kids' natural duty to care for them, something a hired caregiver can't fully replace.
That really connects back to the cultural context. Did the sources share any positive personal stories?
They did. Like Mr. Tong Shiche, who hired a studi for his father, he actually moved back home himself to help with the care, even with the studi there. He said he hired her for peace of mind when he couldn't be there, but he was still the son, still involved.
That's a powerful example.
And stories of caregivers really becoming like extended family members. Madame Li Shiru called her caregiver another daughter, so those close bonds definitely happen too.
That's good to hear.
And, the contribution to cultural diversity was noted, like around Taipei Main Station. Plus, Mr. Tong's example of buying Indonesian snacks for a studi, that little touch showing mutual respect, the idea that treating people well leads to better care.
Right. Mutual respect. That's key. Okay, so that's a really detailed look at the demographic situation and Taiwan's caregiver model. Let's broaden out a bit now. What other major news headlines popped up in the sources from around the region?
Sure, just a quick scan. Vietnam was interesting, directly related to our main topic. They're actually scrapping their old two-child limit policy because of falling birth rates.
Ah, okay, so policy shifting there too.
Yeah. Also, Vietnam was admitted as a BRICS partner country, and they approved a big hike in alcohol tax, like 90% by 2031.
Wow, quite a mix from Vietnam. What about Indonesia?
Well, one report mentioned a province offering cash incentives, but this time for men to get vasectomies, trying to slow population growth there.
Interesting contrast.
Yeah. Also saw notes on Chinese food and beverage companies expanding in Indonesia, and the government revoking some mining permits in the Raja Ampat area, which is environmentally sensitive.
Okay. Anything on the security or diplomacy front?
The usual sort of background noise of U.S.-China tensions impacting trade, tech, even student visas across the region.
Right.
Mention of some border tension between Thailand and Cambodia. News about India and the Philippines strengthening ties and Taiwan extending its visa waiver for Filipinos.
Mhm.
And of course, the Israel-Iran conflict and that Air India plane crash were getting significant coverage everywhere.
Understood. And just quickly, Singapore.
What?
Anything specific mentioned there?
Yeah, just a couple of things. News that their recent COVID-19 waves seem to be easing off. And on the business side, Jetstar Asia is stopping operations, but the SIA group Singapore Airlines is apparently hiring affected staff.
Okay.
So look, wrapping this up, I think what really hits you from all these sources is just how urgent and massive these demographic shifts are, especially the low birth rates and aging populations across East Asia.
Yeah, it's clearly not just numbers on a page. It's reshaping societies, economies, forcing countries to try all sorts of things, some familiar, some, like we saw, quite novel approaches, cash for marriage, subsidizing dads, relying heavily on foreign care workers.
And navigating all this involves these incredibly complex trade-offs, doesn't it, between cultural values, economic pressures, and just trying to design policies that actually work for people. It's a huge challenge.
It certainly is. And that brings our deep dive into this material to a close for today.